Good morning. My name is Dominic Cuevas, and I'm here to report chapters 11 to 16. The report will focus on important notes for chapter 11 to 16, and I will report significant information that will be important as we proceed through thesis 1 and thesis 2. Now let us start with chapter 11. Chapter 11, using interviews and focus groups. First, let us define what is an interview. Interviews are used when the researcher can identify the respondents in connection to the phenomenon he or she is undertaking and can gather these respondents in an interview procedure. Meanwhile, focus groups are utilized when the researcher opted the participants to focus on a particular event and through that come up with insights or ideas with regards to the phenomenon. It is useful when the group dynamic is needed for the research. Group dynamic is defined as the energy within the group, whether negative or positive, and it is brought by strong personalities. Now, after defining what is interview and focus groups, let us now identify the 5 types of interviews. The first one is the one-to-one interview. It is an in-depth and one-to-one interrogation of the researcher to an interview about a certain phenomenon. A face-to-face interview so the researcher can develop a comfortable communication relationship with the interviewee. For the second one is the group interview. In this type of interview, the researcher cannot build a rapport with each respondent but has unique advantages. In this practice, meeting of minds happen because the group of respondents can share and justify their opinions. Some can negate, which some can affirm. The next one is the telephone interview. The interview of a researcher to an interviewee is over the telephone, which means they use telephone in order to communicate or to proceed with this interview. This is often done one-on-one. The researcher cannot observe the interviewee, but it offers convenience for both parties. It also offers some level of privacy. So just like one-to-one interview, the difference between the two is that the telephone interview uses over the telephone communication. Meanwhile, the one-to-one interview needs to have a face-to-face interview. The next one is the online interview. The online interview is done using the internet or the intranet. This internet has 2 types, synchronous and asynchronous. So let us define first synchronous. Synchronous interviews are interviews undertaken real time. Asynchronous interviews are interviews that are conducted out of real time and can be carried out but extended over periods of time. For the fifth one, in a photo elicitation interview. The interview of the researcher to an interviewee involves discussion and interpretation of photograph or a series of photographs. This is also known as a photo interview. Now that we have discussed what is a interview, focus groups, and the different types of interview, how do we conduct these kinds of interview? First, let us go with this figure. The first step to conduct an interview is decide on the interview method. Let us identify which among the interview methods is applicable and appropriate to the nature of the research. Determine what is you hope to learn from the interviewee and identify the people that will provide the richest data and information possible. After that, we continue with devising an interview schedule. It should be highly structured because interviewers are meant for quantitative research. Scope of the interviewing can vary widely, so determine an effective number of people to interview in advance. The third one is to select the interviewees. Decide who will be interviewed based on the population of the study and the need of the research. If the interviewers are not aligned with your need of the research will be seen as invalid because you don't have the same kind of data, or the data gathered will be irrelevant from your project that you are doing. The next one is to contact and interview the interviewees to participate. Contact each of the interviewees and ask if they can be part of your research. Remember that they can refuse to participate and accept it wholeheartedly and try to contact another possible qualified interview. The next one is provide interviewees with formal information on the research. This will serve as a basis whether they will pursue participating in your interview. The information sheet should include your identification, your school, purpose of the interview, and justification of your research. Include also on the information sheet the benefits that the participants can get. Guarantee also the confidentiality of the interview and the safety of the participants. Don't forget to note on your information sheet that their participation is voluntary. After doing the 5 steps, we set up the interview. And after that, conduct the interview, whether it could be the face-to-face, online interview, telephone interview, or other types of interviews. The next one is to conclude the interview. It is dependent on the method, the location, and the time of the interview. The method must be appropriate to the nature of the research. The location must be conducive for ideas and brainstormings. And ensure that you have two power supply electricities and batteries. Provide also the review schedule for the interview. And lastly, manage the data. The safety and the security of the data gathered from the interview is your main concern. Be mindful of the management, transport, and storage of these data. Now that we have identified the types of the interviews, that what is an interview, what is a focus group, and how do we conduct this interview, now now let us go to the conduction of one-to-one interview. Let's more understand deeper what is this interviews. So there is listed before and during. So before conducting a one-to-one interview, please be reminded that to be dressed properly, be prepared for things to go wrong, allow interviewees to make changes they need to make. And during, behave properly, switch the recorder on, and start the interview process. So in the right side, we can see the advantages and disadvantages of conducting one-to-one interview. There are two kinds of advantages. The interviewee is the sole focus of the interviewer. The interviewee has the space and the time to express their individual perspective on or experience of the phenomenon under investigation. The next one is the researcher has this opportunity to develop a rapport or comfortable communication relationship with the interviewee. For the next one is the disadvantages of the one-to-one interview. One-to-one interviews are time consuming. Let us be honest, it's really time consuming. There is also a potential for the interviewees to influence or lead the responses of the interviewee in some way. Now let us talk about the conduction of telephone interview. Before doing this, please provide the interviewee the time and privacy to engage in the interview properly. Be prepared for things to not go according to your plan. Be prepared to ring back at another time or another day. During, follow the interview schedule. Let us respect their time. Allow time for the interview to express themselves. And lastly, if interrupted, wait patiently for the interviewer to resume. Please be respectful and respectful of your words and also their time. The conduction of the group interview as also the before and during actions. Before doing the group interview, ensure that the venue is suitable. The next one is keep in mind to always initiate group dynamic. And lastly, always remember to not offend and cast out any member of the group. During the group interview, ask a direct question. Skillfully and diplomatically discouraged one or two individuals from speaking too much and dominating the group. And lastly, give each member an equal chance to express themselves. Okay, now what do we do if things go wrong? The first one is to examine the causes. Offer to make adjustments and further information on the research. Offer apology for any offense. The next one is accept if the interview is irretrievable. Write a letter containing your apology and outline what happened. Explain it to your thesis advisor and ask some advice to fix this. The third one is to move on and plan to your move Plan your research forward. Learn what you can from the experience and create a better strategy in gathering data. Now, in research, there's always bias. Bias is the research is in research is anything that contaminates or compromises the research. Now that we have identified what is bias, there are three types of bias: the researcher bias, the sampling bias, and the respondent bias. Researcher bias, from the root word of researcher, can be biased in any favor of the particular result of or finding in the research. They can have particular view and want to be confirmed. They can influence the findings of the research through the design of the study. The next one is the sampling bias, occur when the sampling procedure used in the research is flawed or compromised in some way. And lastly, respondent bias. The first one is response set, in which the respondents answer questions in a patterned way. The next one is acquiescence bias, happens when the respondent agrees with everything the interviewer says. Three, social desirability bias occurs when a respondent gives the socially desirable or the politically correct response instead of an honest response. And lastly, prestige bias occurs when the respondent is influenced in responding through perception of the prestige of a group or individual. This is the respondent bias. We can see the response set, the acquiescence bias, social desirability bias, and the prestige bias. This were tackled beforehand. Now that we have done the interview, let us now focus with what is focus group. Focus group is a data collection method where researcher uses a group of participants in a focused discussion on the issue under investigation, designed to produce a new insights. The It differs from group interview in a way that the researcher facilitates the group in focusing on the phenomenon under investigation in the hope of developing from the focus new information and new insights into the phenomenon. And lastly, a focus group is a small but demographically diverse group of people and whose reactions are studied especially in market research or political analysis, in guided or open discussions about a new product or something else to determine the reactions that can be expected from a larger population. Now, there are two types of focus groups. The first one is the online focus groups, and the next one is the face-to-face focus groups. Online focus groups are types of focus groups that is a subset of online research method. They are typically an appropriate research method for consumer research, business-to-business research, and political research. And the next one is the face-to-face focus group. It is a qualitative method of data collection wherein a skilled moderator facilitates discussions on a selected topic among 6 to 10 respondents, allowing them to respond spontaneously to the issues raised. Now that we have talked about the online interviews and the focus groups, now let us identify the advantages and disadvantages of them. The first we could see the advantages and the disadvantages here. The first one is no access issues if the population can go online, which make it very convenient. Very large number can participate. No time limits. The participants may engage more openly if without video link. It can provide a lot of data quickly. It can be structured to guarantee the anonymity and privacy of the participants. Participants are less likely to be intimidated, controlled, or controlling. Participants in asynchronous interviews and focus group have more time to respond. No recording necessary. Accurate transcript provided. Safe and secure environments for both parties. Um, there are also disadvantages. Potential participants must have access to the technologies and capability to use them. Recruitment can be difficult. The connection may be lost. Without video link, participants can be observed. Quality of data may not be adequate. Participants may easily be distracted. Participant engagement may be problematic. Lack of depth in data gathered may be a problem. Asynchronous interviews and focus groups can take a long time to complete errors. And lastly, that the facilitator will have a hard time to ensure cooperation and focus. Now that we have tackled the chapter 11, which is the interview and focus group. Let us now continue to chapter 12. Chapter 12, entitled Using Questionnaires and Skills. These are the four highlights. Survey methodology, questionnaires, and skills are the best fit to be used as the data collection method because of its simplicity and efficiency. In a large amount of population, you cannot thoroughly research each one of them by one because of time concerns, which is very true. As such, you can give the respondents questionnaires or skills which are easy to answer that can generate informative data. Let us highlight the word informative. Questionnaires and skills are basically data gathering methods used in research. Questionnaires and skills are essential instruments that are used to gather primarily quantitative data needed for the research. And lastly, moreover, questionnaires really affects the validity, generality, reliability of the research outcomes. By doing this approach, it lets the researcher to easily perform and accomplish comparison, summarization, and even generalization of the data gathered. Different people take different things generally. Remember, questionnaires can be utilized in both quantitative and qualitative type of research, while skills can only be utilized in quantitative type of research. For qualitative research, questionnaires contains open-ended questions that are subjective in nature, while in quantitative type of research, questionnaires contain much simpler and objective type of questions that can be quantified. Now that we have tackled the skills and questionnaires, there are three types of question: the fixed alternative question, the skill question, and lastly the open-ended question. The fixed alternative question offers multiple choice answers. Skill question is designed to obtain the respondent's opinion, feeling, or sentiment. The second one is a skill question, designed to obtain the respondent's opinion, feeling, or sentiment. And lastly, open-ended questions. These are the questions that is not answerable by yes or no. Now that we have done with the questions, now let us identify what is a skill. Skills are used to quantify, categorize, and classify variables. It actually describes the nature of data, information, and answers given within the number or scores assigned to the questions. Note, skills can only be used in a quantitative type of research. Now that we have tackled what is a skill, now let us talk about the different types of skill. The first one is the Likert scale. Likert scale is a number point scale which asks the respondents how much they agree or disagree with a certain statement. It is coined by Rensis Likert and it can aid in avoiding open-ended and fill in the blank questions that can generate hard to analyze results. It is important. It is important to note it is an orderly gauge with a series of or sequences of statements which the respondents would choose the preference to best support their point of view. The respondents just have to specify the extent or level to which they agree or disagree. Now that we have identified what is a Likert scale, how do we create such? Design what you will measure, create Likert scale indicator questions, make the Likert scale responses. Now that we have talked about the Likert scale, the second type of scale is a semantic differential scale. Semantic differential scale involves multi-point questions with opposite objectives at the two ends to decide which of the adjective best describes a situation under observation. It is created by Charles Osgood, also used by researchers to ask the respondents using two opposite adjectives and let the respondents select which of the two objectives best describes their attitude. It is very reliable for semantic differential scales to come up with popularity and ease of understanding that really helps the researcher to gather information easily. The last type of scale is the Bogardo's social distance scale. It measures fluctuating degrees of closeness in people towards other members of various social, racial, or ethnic group. turned after the creator of the scale, which was Emory Bogardus. Degree of hostility, warmth, intimacy, and indifference between racial or ethnic socials are measured in this scale. Now, there are issues of validity and reliability. So let us first define what is validity and reliability. Validity is the measure of how true, how logical, how consistent, and how comprehensive, and how it can contribute to the body of knowledge. Meanwhile, reliability means that it can be used by others as basis for their research as well. Repeating the research whilst getting consistent results is a measure that it is a reliable research. There are types of reliability. There are three types. The first one is a stability reliability. It means that when the questionnaire is utilized repeatedly over time, it can still generate consistent results. The next one is a representative reliability. While it is utilized in different groups in the same population, it can still produce the same results. Representative reliability. When it is utilized in different groups in the same population, it can still produce the same results. Now, for the validity, there are four major types. The criterion validity, predictive validity, constant validity, and convergent validity. There are three types to test reliability. The first one is the split half method, retest method, and the last one is the intercoder reliability. The split half method measures the equivalence reliability of the questionnaire. In split half method, the questionnaire is divided into two halves. Then, the items in the questionnaire are evenly distributed into the two tests and whether or not the two halves produce same results. Retest method used to measure the stability reliability of the questionnaire. One set of questionnaire will be given to the group for them to answer. Then the result must be collected after some time. Another set of questionnaire with the same content as of the first one will be given to the same group again for them to answer. A questionnaire is considered stability reliable if two sets of the questionnaire generated consistent result. Lastly, the intercoder reliability. The question is studied by more than one researcher, observes, or coders. Then, if their analysis agreed with each other, the questionnaire is considered reliable. Now, the measurement. It is important in research to have measurements. Measurement is essential in research because it aims to find out the quantity, capacity, or dimensions of the event or behaviors that the researcher decides and needs to explore. There are two types of measurement, the quantitative measurement and the qualitative measurement. The quantitative measurement is a quantifiable report of characteristics or events which involve numerical extent is called quantitative measurement. It is commonly used by researchers to create comparison between characteristics or events. For the next one is a qualitative measurement. It is a way of attaining a deeper understanding of a topic. It is used by researcher in order for him to find out the meaning behind certain occurrences. It is often used in grounds that concerns human behavior, for example, social sciences. Now, it is important to have a plot testing. Testing is in a, Plot testing is a rehearsal in the preparation of the research study. It will allow the researcher to test this research approach with a small sum of respondents before the researcher conducts his main study. It is needed to take time to test, iteratively improve and critique the research design before the main research would be performed. Although pilot study is an additional step, by doing it, the researcher will definitely ensure that his user research will dramatically develop and improve the output of the study. And surely the research will run smoothly. The pilot study respondents is consists of only a max of 15 respondents. Now that we have identified what these kinds of are, so let us now point out or list the points to consider when creating a questionnaire. The first one is, what are the content of the questions? Are all of the questions relevant to the research project? The next one is, how the research are they presented? And the third one is, are the questions connected to each other and needs to be in a certain order? And lastly, how long is the questionnaire? Now, it is important that you have a that you will have a um good response rate. Response rate is basically important. More valid response, the researcher can get more valid results in his research. To gain a higher response rate, give the respondents gifts or foods if they finish the questionnaire, for instance. And secondly, make questionnaires simple and clear. Many respondents would not like to answer questionnaires that are very complex and long because they would not like to waste their time. Now that we have discussed chapter 11 and chapter 12, let us now continue with chapters 13. The chapter 13, or the analytical framework, how well can you manage data? Now, there are two orders of data, the quantitative data and the qualitative data. A quantitative data is a type of data wherein you can simply describe by a value. The qualitative data is a data in one which people use word or group of words for its description. Data and data management. There are three. The data, it is the important and it is the facts and statistics which are collected by the researcher. These collected inputs will be used altogether for the analysis. This also serves as the evidence that a study has been performed by the researcher. Data management. It is the way that the researcher handles the data. Moreover, it is about the proper storing or protecting data to ensure accessibility of the data to researcher when needed. And lastly, data organization. These are done by properly having file name conventions for each data. There are two types of data. Now let us continue data analysis. There are two types of data, just like what you have said later on. The quantitative data and the qualitative data. They are quantifiable data. Type of data expresses a range or an amount. This type of data is usually seen in form of measurements. For example, the height of a person could be measured in centimeters, or perhaps the temperature inside a roof can be measured in degrees or Celsius Fahrenheit. The next one is the qualitative data. These type of data are the words that describes the properties of a matter. A simple example of this data is when describing the pitch of a woman's voice while singing in a choir, or it could also be the color of a certain fruit. Now let us remember that quantitative data uses value to describe the data, while qualitative data uses words or a group of words for it to be described. Now let us continue with the quantitative data analysis, meaning values and numbers. Now let us proceed to the quantitative data analysis. Let's define it first. Quantitative data analysis are numerical data or data which have numerical value. According to VAT 2013, quantitative data usually answers questions such as how many, how often, how much. Quantitative data is so much easier to use, especially when the number of data that we analyze is small. Relatively, we use softwares, which is listed here, whenever we have large data sets. Now, let us discuss the six softwares to aid in the quantitative data analysis. The first one is the SPSS, also known as the Statistical Package of Social Sciences, and was first developed by Bent, Hull, and Nee in 1968. The users of the software are commonly from programs of social and health sciences, marketing, and those related to the field of academia. One of the highlights of the program is that it is easy to use, and it also has intuitive user interface. Comparable to Microsoft Excel because of the cells in its interface, The application also computes for the standard error of the mean, which gives the researcher an idea of the accuracy of the mean. It also as a feature which easily excludes data, and SPSS can also handle the data that are missing. But as perfect as it is, there are also limitations to this program. There are two limitations in using SPSS. The first one is there are no robust methods included. Robust statistics is also used to solve problems that come from estimates that are not sensitive to small changes in the basic assumption of the employed statistical model. And number two, limitation when using SPSS in analyzing your data is that it is unavailable to perform merges that are many to many. The next one is the JMP, or the Johns Macintosh program. It is a software that was developed by SAS, or the Statistical Analysis System, in the 1980s. John Stahl created this software in order to take advantage of the graphical user interface that was introduced by Mac. The user of the software involves professionals who are in the field of engineering, specializing in Six Sigma and quality control, or those inclined in research. In the field of biology and pharmaceutics, GMP is also known for its interactive graphics and scripting languages. Last among the highlights is that this software has a great set of online resources which could be used by the researcher. The only limitation of JMP is that, as same as SPSS, the software cannot perform all robust methods. The next one is Stata. Stata, the third software which can be utilized in analyzing quantitative data, was first released in January 1985. It was introduced by Bill Gold and Sean Becketti. They coined the term for the words statistics and data. And this software's usage can be seen in the disciplines that are related to the institutional research, medicine, and political science. Unlike other previous softwares, syntax are mainly used in this software. But not to worry, because there are still menus that are user-friendly. In one of the features, Mata, the software offers programming of matrices. It also works well with data that are related to surveys and time series. However, there are also some disadvantages when using this software. First is that program could only handle one dataset at a time. Additionally, there are limited sizes of datasets that can be used. The researcher may need to sacrifice a number of variables depending on the package being used. This may be detrimental since the reliability of the amount of data would be at stake. The next one is the SAS, was first developed in the year 1966 and was released after 6 years. The program stands for Statistical Analytical Analysis System and was developed by Anthony Barr and James Goodnight, with financial assistance of the National Institute of Health. The users of this software are from those of the government and those related to the field of finance, manufacturing, and science. The good side with this software is that it can handle extremely large datasets, but the graphics compared to other softwares are more difficult to manipulate. It is also not a user-friendly software for those researchers who are not new to using SAS. The next one is R. This software was created by two professionals from the University of Auckland. The names of the software's creators are Ross Hiaka and Robert Gentleman. Hence, the name R was formed. Limitations that are found using R are follows. The program has a large online community, especially when questions are being asked. This is mainly because there is no formal technical support when using this program. Another is that since it can interact with different programs, in order to have an ease in using R, the program should using this software should already have a good understanding of the different types of data used. As a result, it is really very hard to examine packages that are written by other users. And lastly, MATLAB. According to the Wright and Sandberg, it is a program that is widely used in the field of applied mathematics. It is also used in the research and education of different universities such as us, and is also found in the industry. The program name Matrix stands for Matrix Laboratory. They also added that this software was built around vectors and matrices. It was also used in solve equations related to the algebra and calculus. It is rich in graphic tools which it is rich in graphic tools which can produce two-dimensional and three-dimensional illustration. As we can see here in the here in the table, we could see the x and y variable, which is the learning and the experience. You could see that the SPSS software has a gradual learning curve. GMP has also a gradual learning curve, same as SPS. The Stata has a moderate learning curve. SAS has a steep learning curve. R and MATLAB also represent steep learning curve, which meaning that as learning progresses, learning experience progresses, learning gradually stops compared to that of SAS. As experiences comes into play, learning also gradually increases. Now that we have identified the six softwares, qualitative data analysis. Qualitative data involves a descriptive type of data. In research, qualitative data are very important since this determines particular frequency of traits or characteristics in a sample population. Qualitative data are usually found in the form of narratives. They can also be seen in images or illustration. How do we abstraction? While reading a narrative of an author or while listening to the person being interviewed, we could run through all the data that was gathered, classify the data according to the teams they belong to. Be sure that there are no data left to be classified into the team list. Condense the list of teams in a logical manner, a manner in which the data could be understood easily by the readers. Eventually, the researchers could create a new team where some or all of the teams could cluster. Now, let us understand data analysis much deeper. Data analysis have a four stages to be exact. The first one is description stage. Description stage, the researcher provides descriptive analysis of all the data gathered for the research. The next one is the interpretation stage. After giving a thorough description of all the data, the researcher gives his take on the meaning each data gives. The next one is conclusion stage. From the interpretation stage, the researcher then draws some kind of conclusion. This conclusion may of major or minor importance to the data. Usually conclusions drawn from this are minor, which would add the lead end to the major conclusion. And lastly, the theorization stage. This stage is where the researcher compares the finding of their data analysis to similar literature found in the literature review. Now that we have done the chapter 13 on the data, let us go to the chapter 14, which is the analyzing quantitative data. Raw data that is gathered initially cannot be directly used of the types of errors and problems that are present. It needs clarification and organization. So meaning, the data that you have gathered through the procedures that you have done, it's either interview or focus groups, it's what you call raw data. This data is not ready for the conclusion. Hence, clarification and organization is very important for this raw data. Gathered raw data will be converted into information useful for the researcher. That's like what I said. Analyzed data can answer or explain different queries, theories, and questions. It can be both categorical and numerical. Quantitative data can obtain complex values. Thus, it may be calculated using a calculator or sometimes software is needed to quickly generate the results. In addition, quantitative data begins from a hypothesis which needs to conduct tests to gather the results, and creating generalizations are often called as discussions. So let us now discuss variable in quantitative analysis. So variable is an element of measurement. In quantitative analysis, it may consist of more than one value. It is a cause and effect are called independent and dependent variables, respectively. When the independent variable affects the dependent variable, there is an intervening variable. So, now that we have identified what is a variable and what is its important in in research, let us now understand the different levels of variable in data analysis. First one is a nominal variable. No assumptions can be done around the relations of the variable. The value for each are as distinct as categories cannot be ranked and serve only as labels. Nominal level variables are considered as the lowest level of measurement. Ordinal variables is used as parameters or scales. Nominal variables are alike to the ordinal variables. The only dissimilarity between the two is that there is a clear ordering of variables. The next one is interval variables. Among all of the level variables, the interval is considered as the highest unit of measurement. Interval variables contain data that have measurable and meaningful distance among values. And lastly, dichotomous variable. It consists of variable with only two values and can only be called as dummy according to Patel 2009. This type of variable can be quantitative value or qualitative. Let us now discuss measures of central tendency. There are three types that we have learned ever since: the mean, median, and the mode. The median is the middle value of a range of values that can be used with ordinal ratio or interval measurements, and assumptions are needed not to be done is called median. Mean, commonly known as arithmetic average, mean can be calculated by adding up the number of observation values and dividing it to the amount of observation. Commonly, it is used as a measure of central tendency in the interval variables if distribution is marginally asymmetric or numerous circumstances are outliers. Selecting the mean may not provide promising results. Mode. Most observed and occurring value in a set of range is called mode. It is less used in other levels of measurements and is commonly engaged with a nominal variable. Dispersion measures. There are four types. Actually, the four types. The first one is the range. It is a maximum and the minimum value in a range of data. According to Patel 2009, it is the simply highest value of variable minus the lowest value of the variable. Now, there's an interquartile range. It focuses on a difference between the first quartile and the third quartile to eliminate the outliers. Interquartile is as strong as measure of sample dispersion and is considered the middle value of the upper and lower halves of the data. The next one is the standard deviation. It is used for comparing sets of data that contain the same mean, but that is a different range of data. Spread of the data about the mean is what the standard deviation means. Other significant measurements are percentage. It is a particular kind of scale that is commonly used with a measure of 1 up to 100. Ratios. It is used to compare two values. For illustration, it is simply A is to B, or can be read A is to B. It can be computed as A divided by B. And lastly, proportions. It is a denominator. It is a denominator in this total number of cases of proportion. Ratios are related to proportions. Now, let us go to the inferential statistics. First, let us identify inferential statistics. It is used in quantitative data analysis to predict certain instances and to infer according to the data that tries to come up with an idea that's beyond the existing data. Gathered data is used in drawing inferences or conclusions and may refer it as a statistical inference. The first five are the t-test, to test if the means of the groups are statistically different. The second one is ANOVA, to test if the means of the group are statistically different. Correlation test, a single number that states the degree of connection of the two variables. The amount measures which when the independent variable predicts the dependent variable. The fourth one is a simple linear regression. It determines the range in which the variable that is dependent is being predicted by the variable that is independent and inform how well do line matches the data. And last one, the multiple linear regression measures how fine the value of a dependent variable that is to be predicted by multiple independent variables. We can see the bar chart. Bar chart is to represent the quantitative data. This type of data representation allows easy comparison among the set of data. Graphs gives the researchers a visual representation of the data from them to attain different conclusions and also to check if the data were analyzed correctly and all of it were included, because sometimes the researcher tends to overlook some points, especially if the data given were not arranged graphically. Under that is an example of a bar chart. Now, Let's now dive to chapter 15, or the analyzing qualitative data. Now let us now let us continue with chapter 15, analyzing qualitative data. Qualitative data, primarily used in qualitative research, is a type of research is used in describing how an issue is experienced by the people and the society, wherein the type of research allows gathering of the data by getting and knowing the side of every individual involved in the issue. There are two core approaches of analyzing qualitative data. The first one is a deductive approach. This type of approach of the qualitative research involves data analysis that is based on the evidence through predictions and predetermination. An approach originated from empirical pole to the theoretical pole. The next one is the inductive approach. This is the qualitative data analysis includes data analysis that is gathered from all information and the data available in order to formulate general concepts and ideas. This is an approach opposite from the deductive approach because this approach is originated from theoretical pole to the empirical pole. Now we can see that the inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning have different approaches. The inductive reasoning starts with the observation and then the generalization, then eventually to the paradigm or theory. The deductive reasoning starts with is the vice versa. It starts with the theory, then with the predictions, and consecutively the experiment. Now, let us now discuss the difference between the qualitative research and the quantitative research. For qualitative research, it answers the questions the what and the why. This seeks to explore, explain, and understand a certain issue and phenomena. For quantitative research, how many? This seeks to confirm a hypothesis about a certain issue and phenomena. Okay, the data provided are in narrative form for qualitative research, while the quantitative research is the data provided is in numerical form and the results are statistical. For qualitative research, data are gathered through interviews, content analysis, observation, etc. Use of less structured method is applied in qualitative research. For quantitative research, data are gathered through questionnaires, instruments, etc. Use of highly structured methods is applied in a quantitative research. Um, for qualitative research, open-ended questions are asked for the purpose of exploration on a certain topic and phenomena. For quantitative research, closed-ended questions are asked in order to have answers and feedback to be quantified. The research design is flexible in nature for qualitative research, while quantitative research design is highly structured in nature. It focuses on advancement of the study. Lastly, the presentation of results is objective. It may reveal biases, experiences, and values which affect how the results are interpreted. For qualitative research and quantitative research, the results are presented and documented in an objective approach. So for the qualitative research approaches versus focus, these are the different qualitative research approach, and this is a focus. For narrative, the approach is in the form of a telling of a story. The phenomenology, the approach aims and seeks to understand or provide an explanation about life experiences, situation, and phenomena. Grounded theory. This approach aims to conduct an investigation of a particular situation, process, or action interaction. The main goal of this approach is to build up a theory that is based on the collected data through observation. Ethnography. This approach is focused on the description and interpretation of social groups. And lastly, case study. This qualitative research approach is on the explanation of how this is focused on the examination of situation and events in a defined diagram or framework. The approach is also focused in the development of depth analysis of multiple studies and cases. Now, let's now go through qualitative research approaches versus how the data is collected. In narrative, the approach is in the form of interviews and documentary documents. Phenomenology is data collection primarily to do interviews and keen observation. Grounded theory, data through formal interview that would take 20 minutes to 30 minutes talk with the involve individual and personality. For ethnography, the approach for the data collection of the data includes immersion. The approach is to conduct interviews and observations of an active particular cultural group. And lastly, case study. The data collection for this approach includes documentation of the case, interviews, archives, observations, and artifacts. Now, let us go to the data analysis. How is the data analyzed? For narrative, analyzation, stories, and reviews of content, such as historical one. Phenomenology, the approach analysis includes the study and description of the experiences, examination of meaning and the topic's context, location of the theme, and the classification of a particular theme. Grounded theory, the data analysis for this particular approach involves coding, such as open, axial, and selective. The coding will be used for the classification of this category of the data. It also includes a description of on the category's implications. Ethnography, development for the particular approach involves the description and interpretation of findings. And lastly, case study. The highlight for this approach is development of detailed analysis. Identification of themes and making assertions are also involved in this approach. Now, how do we do the written reports for the different qualitative research approaches? The first one is that the data visualization of the light of the person for the narrative. Phenomenology includes the report of the importance and essence of the situation experience. Grounded theory includes the report of the presenting results in a theory, a theoretical method, a diagram or a figure wherein the phenomena is represented. Ethnography. The approaches includes the report of presenting results in the description of a cultural behavior of a certain cultural group. Case study approaches includes the in-depth discussion of the on the case study of the case. This includes description of the study, description of the themes, and also the possible lessons that are learned during the conduct of the study. Now, let us now discuss the qualitative data analysis. Now, first, let us identify what is a qualitative data analysis. It is a process wherein the qualitative data gathered are analyzed, observations, symbols, and words comprise the qualitative data. In order to analyze this data, every step should be understood. Now, first, let us understand the analysis of content. Okay. Analysis of content. This involves the analysis and interpretation of data. Yeah? Analysis and interpretation of data. So first, we analyze and interpret the data. And the narrative analysis. This analysis approach often includes the reformulation of accounts stated and written by other people in a different content and a different experience they had. Discourse analysis. This analysis includes the way people are expressing themselves through language they are using in everyday situation. It is a method of analysis wherein communication is the main source. Example are interactions and written text. The next one is grounded theory. This is an approach wherein the development of explanation for a given situation of the case being studied. It is where the researcher comes up to a concept in which all the studied cases are fit into it. And lastly, conversation analysis. This analysis takes into account the principle of people in conversation. It is where the examination of language is a key concept. So validity in a qualitative research. Qualitative research are more questioned and assessed due to the reason every researcher is taking process to have it sure that the research findings they will get are suitable and trustworthy. It is also very important to have a valid, credible findings, for these findings are intended to be useful tool to readers. First, credibility. This questions the data if it is trustworthy enough. It is more on the content of the data and not about the number of data gathered. This can involve cross-checking in order to test its validity, wherein the respondents involved in the research can tell and decide if the findings are those that actually reflected in a given situation. Transferability. This is where the ability for the research to get transferred into another content. The results reflected are generalized in order to be applied even with the similar situations are phenomenal. Dependability. These characteristics of the finding direct to legitimacy, wherein the consistency of the results is given attention. And lastly, confirmability. It is an objective approach wherein the findings are supported well even if examined by other researchers. Now, let us go to the last chapter, chapter 16, drawing conclusions and writing research. Writing conclusion is the final chapter in making your research. Conclusions are the facts and that the researcher formulated and developed regarding to the data evaluation that the researcher conducted. They are the list of facts regarding the study, which are directed results from the data gathered analysis. Conclusions are produced based on the results observed in the performance of the experimentation and interpretation. Overall, conclusion in the research project serves as a summary of the findings discovered about the study. It serves as an answer to general objective of the study. And lastly, conclusion gives a fact about the research problems arranged in a manner that this answers the specific objectives of the study. Now, what are the things to consider for a good conclusion in a research? A good conclusion must be written in a good closing paragraph. Just like when writing, you are writing your introduction that is must be appealing to the readers. That for conclusion, it must leave a good impression to the readers, summarizing your consideration, concerns, and conveying on the significance of your research. Identifying the gap in research writing. In the conclusion, you must include the gap and identify it for future purposes, demonstrating the significance of your thought. And lastly, introducing conceivable new or extended perspective about the research issue. Now, let us now tackle the problems to avoid in writing conclusions. The first one is conclusion is not concise. The conclusion should be simple and straight to the point. The content of the conclusion should be brief, where the focus of the conclusion is on the implications, evaluations, and insights that they made. The next one is unable to comment on larger and more significant issues. You should consider focusing and giving emphasis on the gaps in literature. The conclusion should only include how you contribute new knowledges and place research with a larger context. Just like what we did earlier, the presenter gave a importance of the conclusion to the knowledge that is being proceeded. That next one is unable to reveal problems and negative results. The conclusion should never ignore the negative aspects of the research process, like problems encountered during the conduct of the study that must be included in making the researcher's overall conclusion. The next one is unable to conclude a clear summary of what was learned. The conclusion should be summarized briefly and clearly. The researcher could write a conclusion in just 1 to 3 sentences. Unable to match the objective of your research. The conclusion should match the objectives and primary goals of the research. And lastly, resist the urge to apologize. In writing conclusion, the researcher must be confident to the results of his study. He must avoid having doubts on the produced data of this research. Now, what are your checklists for a good conclusion? Now, let us question yourself before doing your conclusion. Is the theory of the paper precisely rehashed? Are the central matters of the paper tended to pull together? Do you help the reader to remind the significance of the point? Is there feeling of conclusion? Do you abstain from exhibiting new data? Now, the conclusion also exhibits the recommendation of the study. The recommendation of the study are the ways forward for the research. Recommendation should be succinct and it should be meaningful in relation to the aim and objectives of the research. They should respond to the research statement. Recommendations are the formulated suggestions of the researcher in order to further improve the research process used for the study. In formulating the research recommendations, recommend Recommendations: the researcher conducts a thorough analysis on each part of the research process and takes note of the part that is needed to improve that might have affected the findings of the research. That is all for my reporting. That is for chapters 11 to 16. Again, I am Vince Dominic J. Cuevas, reporting chapter 11 to 16. Have a great day and thank you.